almost all women. So we just didn't plan it that way, but that's the way it happened. So this next panel, as everybody gets seated here, this next panel is one that's on digital media journalism. Oh yes, that's right. It's okay. It's nothing private in there. And everyone's name is back up here behind me. And we're going to just quickly get some quick statements from folks. And I'll just start, I'll start over here with Kevin.
So I will be quick. I just wanted to say from where I sit, I work for the Voice of America, which is a wonderful combination of two things we've seen on display today, which is government efficiency and journalistic humility, right? But to me, from where I sit, and the way journalism has changed so dramatically, the questions that we ask ourselves every day as journalists, or in my case, even as a broadcaster, is who is our audience? And I've heard a lot of talk about how we talk to journalists, but I think we, as a government agency, you need to keep in mind is what is your end product and who is your end user and who it is that you're talking to. And the other issue that we need to talk about is, in regards to social media and in journalism these days, is there is an element of trust. Your audience is watching a 24-hour live newscast on their phone, and they're going to believe the people that they've had a conversation with over days, weeks, and months. So to be held credible, to be seen as a fair purveyor of information, you need to be part of the gang. You need to be trusted, you need to be constant, you need to be available, you need to be engaged. Or, if you don't have the time to do that, then you need to do the research into the people that you're trying to speak with and find out who they trust, so you can get that person to trust you. Otherwise, you'll either be Judith Miller or Bill O'Reilly. You will have no credibility with the audience you're trying to speak to, because the people who are watching you online don't view you as a trusted influence just because you work for a news agency. They believe you're a trusted influence because you've established yourself as a friend over a long period of time.
I'm Carrie Clayton, I'm Director of Communications for NOAA. Not quite sure how to follow that up. I manage public affairs. Is it not on? Is that on? I've never been told I'm not loud enough, so, you know. Thank you. Again, I'm Karen Clayton. I'm Director of Communications here at NOAA. I oversee an office of about 20 public affairs officers. And to piggyback off of what Kevin said, I think our office prides ourselves on our ability to communicate not just with journalists, but with the public. I think public opinion of our agency is that we are trusted, and that the information that we put out is not only accurate, it's timely, and that we have a cadre of scientists who we really try to make accessible to journalists and to the general public. We have, as Kevin said, variety of audiences, everyone from educators to science geeks to teachers to other scientists. And part of our job every single day is distilling the science that we're putting out in a way that is palatable and understandable for folks across those audiences. And then to compound things, we have a different variety of platforms to communicate with people. Everything from the traditional press release, that I would argue is kind of going the way of the dinosaur, to social media, both on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and traditional blogs, video, and you name it. We sort of also run into the classic challenge of being a U.S. government agency, and because of that, government, as you all know, is very slow to adopt new technologies, and there are a variety of different reasons for that. Again, part of why I'm excited to be on this panel is to have a nice, robust conversation about how you reach millennials who are increasingly relying on Facebook and Twitter to get their news, and then baby boomers who are still tuning into the evening newscasts and getting the paper every single day. And how do you work with folks like Seth, who are doing investigative journalism and long-form journalism, while also working for folks at blogs who are just pushing out content on an hourly basis. So I think I'll leave it at that.
I'm Elizabeth Shogren, and I work for High Country News, which is both a website and a magazine. It comes out twice a month. And also, I used to be at National Public Radio for 10 years, and that's where I covered the BP spill. And with that experience, I think I have some insights into what it's like to be in broadcast and digital audio, and the special challenges that I hope that the government will think of when they're thinking about access to coverage of disasters. And since everybody's been talking about the big ideas like access to truth, I thought I'd talk about a smaller idea, which is access, just period, to the goods. So I wanted to relay one of the incidents that happened to me when I was covering the BP spill. One of many where public affairs officials from the federal government, I reached them on the cell phone and they put me in touch with a scientist who I could run out and meet on the scene as they were bringing in the goods, the bad stuff that my listeners needed to hear about, because that helped them get the sense of what was going on in the spill. And specifically in this instance, I remember Monica Allen from NOAA was incredibly patient with me, and she put me in touch with a veterinarian, Brian Stacy, a NOAA veterinarian, so that I could be waiting at the dock when he came in with the turtles covered with the gloppy oil. So by that, so what does it matter? Isn't it just kind of the same thing to be told that there were 4 turtles that came in covered with oil on the phone? No. I mean, because I was able to be there, I could bring, the millions of NPR listeners to that scene on the docks, and this veterinarian could speak to them in their ear, and you could hear the pathos in his voice as he was holding these endangered species that were covered with this gloppy oil. And I could describe in my words, because I was seeing it, what that looked like, and talk about where these turtles were 20 miles from the BP spill, and why they were still, because of the way the ecosystems were, covered with the gloppy oil. So there was a whole story that taught me a lot about the way ocean currents work and why oil spills are so damaging to species. And to some extent, I really wish the government would tell us all the truth that they know from the beginning. And that is very important. And I also, I loved what panelists before talked about, how we don't want just part of, if you don't have the whole truth, make it clear what you don't know. But I also think that what I really hope and pray for is that the government will continue to give its public affairs offices like Monica Allen or whoever it happens, or the Fish and Wildlife Service people I worked with on the scene who were able to take me out on, connect, well, maybe these were state officials, but state officials gave me, a place on the boat so I could go out with them when they were picking up the oiled pelicans. And that made a difference, to be able to be there on the scene and have, literally the crying people the crying wildlife experts who were picking up these birds, and explain to it. Now, it makes it sound like, I only care about the pathos, and I also care about the truth, but I think that the truth comes in part from understanding the true impact, and you're never going to understand that from just data. So please, in the future, keep finding ways to get journalists as close as possible to the scene of disasters. And it's not just because we like to see pain, but that's how people understand what's going on. And I know sometimes it's dangerous, but that's part of the job. I mean, I've covered wars and refugee crises around the world, and that's a risk journalists take because they want to get the truth out. And so, anyway, that's my more than 5 minutes. I'm sorry. Thank you.
Sure. I think my colleague Mark there made a good point about the speed at which we all write now, which I think is really important to understand that we're all writing for an immediate deadline, not like a 5 o'clock deadline or even 11 o'clock deadline like one might have written for in the past. So I think it's important to understand that, but it's also important to understand the speed at which we get information now as well. I think that's increased dramatically because we're getting notes from social media, people on Twitter who are telling us information about what they're seeing on the ground. We're getting information from a variety of different sources out there, advocacy groups, industry groups. That's coming at us a lot faster than we're getting responses from government agencies in a lot of cases. So it's sort of we're getting this flood of information that we then are trying to figure out how to deal with much faster than we used to, which is why I think it requires us to come and ask for information a lot faster than you might be used to providing it. I think it's important for you to know that other groups are getting to reporters a lot faster as well. So I might be getting some weird tip about something happening on the ground that I need to ask a government person to respond to rather quickly, so I know if it's real or not. I think it's just important to know that the agencies' response times do not, others are much farther ahead of their agencies when it comes to response times, getting information out there, and trying to keep up with that in the current news world is really important. I think one other important thing about the sort of speed of the news cycle now that is good is that it's also creates the ability to self-correct. So if a reporter does something that is gets something up that's not accurate, you can almost immediately get them to correct it if it's needed, or talk to them about maybe other angles to pursue and follow-up stories to do, because we're all writing so much and so fast, and it's online. So it's a lot easier. It's not like a newspaper where you wouldn't have a correction for a day or two. I can have something up right away if something's wrong, and trust me, most good reporters don't want to get something wrong. So it's important to have those dialogues and try to keep an open discussion about it, and knowing that if something is indeed wrong, that we want to correct it and can correct it quickly. Another thing I think is really important to talk about is getting the right people on the phone to talk to reporters. One of my biggest frustrations during the Deepwater Horizon spill was, sort of being funneled through the Joint Information Center and not really knowing who's picking up the phone, and maybe it ended up being somebody from BP, and I just really want to talk to somebody from NOAA, and having to really just ask for clarity, like who are you and who do you work for, which became a lot more complicated than it needed to be, because there was just like a slew of contractors there, and like honestly, I just wanted to know who I was dealing with, so I could understand from my perspective who the person was and where they're coming from, what their knowledge base might be. As a reporter who covers environmental issues generally, I often had very specific questions that needed to go to fairly specific people at agencies. And there are questions that someone from Interior might be able to handle and not someone from NOAA, or someone from EPA might need to handle and not someone from Interior. So I understand why there's sort of the funnel of the JIC, but a lot of times it made it harder for me to get information would have been otherwise, because I had to sort of go through hoops to get to people that, when I actually knew who I needed to talk to anyway at the agency. I also wanted to make one point about, I think it was Mark who made on the panel earlier about getting to know sources beforehand, or getting to know reporters beforehand, which I think is really important. There's a lot of us who are on the environmental beat regularly. It's good to get to know us, come to Society of Environmental Journalists events, and put names and faces. But I think it's also important to know that the media landscape is changing very quickly, and you don't know who the reporter is going to be working for the next spill. I work at the Huffington Post now. We've only been around 10 years, so who knows when the next big event happens, what the outlet will be that's calling you. And I don't think you necessarily need to treat outlets that are new as lesser. I think that's important to know. I mean, looking at like Inside Climate won a Pulitzer for coverage that they did on an oil spill a few years ago, and that's not something that necessarily everyone had heard of or had heard of a few years ago. And so I think that there's sometimes an information hierarchy about who gets information when and who gets a response. And so it's important to know that there are a lot of different kinds of media organizations today that you might need to respond to that are not just the New York Times. So making sure that you share information as widely as you can, and you'll get to know the reporters eventually. You'll get to know what sort of outlets are people who want to tell real, true, good stories, and people who are sort of filing sort of not that great stories. You'll get to know that, but I think you can approach it with an open mind, given whatever outlet it might be. Those are my main points.
Okay. I'm Debbie Payton, NOAA's Office of Response and Restoration. I'm the Emergency Response Division Director. I have been doing emergency response. My first emergency response was Ixtoc 1 in 1979, so I've done most every major emergency response related to oil and chemical in the U.S. I've really watched the evolution of how media and government responders interact, and I think we're on a much better path, but I think that there's actually some healthy things with a little bit of tension, and I think for media to be pushing the government, you need a little bit of that tension. So I'm actually not afraid of that, and I really appreciate Seth being pretty bold there. when I was looking at digital media in particular, because that is a significant change in media over the last 10 years, but really even significantly over the last 5 or 6 years, I tried to say, what could I bring to this audience that would give us some discussion? I identified 3 opportunities it's bringing us and 3 pretty significant challenges on the federal responder side it brings us. Opportunities, obviously, and we can see this in the Refugio Beach incident in California right now, the digital media, the Twitter, the Facebook, the blogging, different ways to get information out there, it is really proving a great source to get out safety-related information, fishery and beach closure information that is just operational situational awareness information you want to get out to the public. That is a great opportunity it provides us, and I think Refugio is a great example. The JIC actually set up a very good website. I think it's managed by the Coast Guard. Pretty sure the Coast Guard's managing that, right? It's a great website, and it is updated regularly, multiple times a day with information to get out. That's actually kind of new. In the past, the websites were not that full of information as they are now. So I think that might be a lesson coming forward. Second thing is it's easier for government communicators, and again, I'm on the science side, I manage the scientists associated with it. I'm not on the communication side, but our communicators within NOAA need to know what are the issues, what is it that the public is concerned about, what should we be providing information on, where do we need to find experts to talk to media, and actually with social media, you can monitor where it is that people are having issues. So I think that's a great opportunity. The third great opportunity is with the digital media. It allows us to provide science information. You know, a lot of times the science information is relatively complex, and one of the things we've really learned is the audience really doesn't want you to dumb it down too much. Let them figure out what they know and don't know. Digital media allows us to provide information on a response at different levels, and then it's memorialized. People can go back and find it and say, oh, okay, I care about chemistry, and here's some kind of basics chemistry. Oh, look, now I can go deeper and deeper, and they can get to whatever level is appropriate for what they're interested in. So those are the 3 opportunities. The 3 challenges I chose, and the first one, Kate, you kind of mentioned it, and it was mentioned a little bit more down the road, speed and quality of information. And Dana mentioned this too. Everybody wants information right away, and they want a lot more information than we were providing 5 or 10 years ago. And the government is a slow machine. We're slow to catch up to some of that. So how do we get the information out there where we have some quality? And I have seen it multiple times. When somebody speaks from the government, there is that, this is a federal official, this is an official answer. So there is a hesitation to say something that may not be right. And that slows down that access to information. I know on the NOAA side, we are coached very regularly. If someone asks you a question and it's in your lane, you answer the question. You don't hold back on answering the question as long as it is within your lane of technical expertise. But there's an increase in expectations in how quickly we're going to provide that information. And on the science side, we don't often know. In earlier, I don't remember if it was Mark or Seth that talked about the SEJ person, known knowns and the unknowns. We do try to communicate that, but a lot of times in the beginning, you don't know what you don't know. And that is a really difficult thing to message. So the other thing is, everybody's a reporter. There are bloggers, there are an awful lot more people than your traditional standard journalists that we might have dealt with 10 years ago. There's a lot, different type of people with different types of expertise, and that makes it much more difficult. So that's a challenge. The other challenge, and it kind of comes back to this document, is because we're trying to answer things very quickly and get the information out very quickly, you can get contradictory information. Everybody's looking at their part of the elephant. So I might be looking at one part of the element, Roger might be looking at the bird's part, and we might have information that actually contradicts each other. When you have federal agencies contradicting each other, it only creates more public confusion. So that's, I think, the really hard rub, and where I think federal agencies were trying to go with this document is how do we, when we have an incident that is that large, how do we keep from getting contradictory information out there that is only going to confuse things. And what happens when things get confused, we had it in Deepwater Horizon, is then the burden on the responders who are supposed to be responding to the incident increases, because now you're having to solve problems that you created in the media because you had conflicting information. So you want to get the information out there right in the first place. And then the last challenge is, are we ready to do it well? Digital media communication. In this, after Deepwater Horizon, we provided a grant to the University of New Hampshire to do a study on communication, and the issue was dispersants. Communicating the complex science of dispersants to the public, and what did we do right, what did we do wrong. And one of the things that they came back with as a lesson learned, which I remember, is if you can't engage in social media well and keep up the long-term commitment, don't start it, because you lose more trust that way than you gain. So is the government ready to do it well? And Mark mentioned this. BP is paying attention. Sorry. Is it mine? Oh, it did. My thing died. Wow. Okay. Sorry. Yeah, I talked it into submission. So BP is watching the media all the time. They are ready on top of that. The government is not quite there yet. So are we really ready to make that commitment? And what do we need to do as federal agencies to come up to make the commitment? So those are my 3 opportunities. Those are my 3 challenges that I see.
Go ahead.
I'll be brief. So the Coast Guard participates just in the normal course of business in a number of online social media platforms. And it's advancing 2 principles. The first one, I think the first speaker spoke about, is basically going where the audience is and talking to them in the form that they want to be communicated in. So social media is increasingly the platform they want to be communicated in. I read a study that the generation behind the millennials that are coming on board use Snapchat for their primary source of news. It's the 6-second or the 6-second video or photo app. That horrifies me, but it is where people are going for information. The Coast Guard doesn't necessarily. We take kind of a conservative view of this. We stay to the established social media platforms. And it also advances, that gives us the opportunity to advance our second principle, I think, that you alluded to. In the Coast Guard, if you own it or you're responsible for it, you can talk about it. And that means in a variety of platforms. That gives us the opportunity to give media the access to a person that's doing a mission. When it gets outside their area of responsibility, that's when you get the, I don't know, I can't answer that question, but there's a very well-learned ethos in the Coast Guard, at least, that if I own it, I can, or I'm responsible for it, I can talk about it. Taking that forward into a contingency, Deepwater Horizon, the Sun's exercises before that didn't contemplate a social media environment, I'd have to say. So there are pros and cons I could talk about, but I just wanted to use maybe 2 vignettes to describe kind of the pluses and minuses of social media. We had a small social media group. We had, of course, on the website, but as far as running our social media platforms, we had a small group doing that. We had a success. We had several successes, but one of them that I'll talk about is online scientist forums, these kind of online Twitter open houses or discussions, and they were very popular. We would have call-ins, we'd have tweet-ins, we'd have discussions ongoing with scientists. It was a good opportunity for us to get a lot of information out and really engage in a dialogue in social media with the scientists on dispersants or seafood quality, etc. That was one of our successes. One of our failures was our primary blogger, who had gone through the pains to establish, basically establish her online credibility, was basically character assassinated to the point that she lost her full-time job. So you're not only engaging in this, but you're kind of the challenge is during a disaster, keeping that discussion that you've opened up in social media productive, because it is anonymous, it's unmoderated, and you could very quickly be running your own hate mail. And that is not a productive means of communication. And so how to walk the line of putting out information, engaging the public, because it does have advantages. It helps you establish a reputation for transparency. It helps you engage in a dialogue, not only where you're talking, but where you're listening, where you're sensing where things are going on. It helps you measure how successful your communications are, but it can go in the unproductive direction very quickly, and that's always a risk that we run, so that these discussions don't, that they perpetuate false information. So that's a constant challenge that we're dealing with, and that I dare say we haven't quite got right yet, but that's one of the challenges that we face in establishing these online and social media presences. So I'm going to kick it over to the moderator and take some questions.
Okay, I think we'll open this up to questions from the audience. And I remember, Justin, is that person still here who had the question? Yes, there she is. There she is. So now is the time for your question for social media.
Thanks. So a lot of you answered the question. Again, my name is Michelle Blackson. I'm at the Pew Charitable Trust. So I have the unique experience of being on both sides. I was a newspaper reporter until I went over to the dark side and now work in media relations. So my question is, so the saying is you can't defuse a bomb that's already gone off. And so you have social media, you have a disaster, you have a lot of information. At what point do reporters decide that that's where they're going to get their information? They're just going to see what's being tweeted and what's being heard and said because they're not getting the response that they want, or they're not having access. Because, I mean, I can see both sides of it. I can see the need for, say, NOAA or others to put the information out there, or the Coast Guard to say, here's where we're going to be, and then say, no, it's already out there. And then reporters to say, okay, well, I'm just going to pull the information off of Twitter. Here's what somebody else is saying. I'm going to go interview my man on the street. I mean, you see where this is going, and then we sort of don't have the communication. We don't have the interpersonal. We don't have official statements. So I don't know if anybody wanted to comment on that.
In this example, I mean, if there's something that's being talked about, it's hard to go with like an abstract idea, but if there's some specific thing that's being talked about as happening on social media, I would go to the people who would actually have knowledge on the ground, whether it's scientists or agency heads, and say, hey, is this happening? What's the case here? What's the truth? And try to find out more information. I wouldn't print it without an actual response, but I think that the people who are handling those kind of questions need to know that that is something that's circulating, is out there, that idea is out there. Even if I'm not reporting it right now, I'm coming to you to try to get some solid information one way or another on it. So it behooves you to respond to us quickly one way or another, right? Like whether it's totally bunk and you don't know where that's coming from, or whether there's some truth to it, or it's just a quick response would help diffuse a bomb in that case. And I'm thinking of a particular example. A few years ago with the Mayflower spill in Arkansas, I got some tip about something about airplanes not being allowed to fly over, and I spent hours and hours trying to find out from the FAA whether that was true or not, and I found out it wasn't true, and the tip I got was bad. But in the course of time I spent trying to get a response from an agency, other people had put that story out as if it were true, and so I ended up not writing a story because there was nothing to write, but in that course of time, other people had written it. So what you can respond with is helpful. And if the response is, I don't have an answer for you right now, I'll get back to you by 5, that's fine too. I can wait, I just need a sense of whether I'm going to be waiting forever or whether you're just going to ignore me.
If I could about that, we do understand. We do understand the need for the pressures on the media to post quickly, to respond quickly, and the number of sources that you have to rely on to get into a story so that you can meet that deadline. We completely sympathize with that. However, all of those other sources are not the federal government. So you could probably refer to that source, but you don't even remember who they are now, because these organizations, they don't have the responsibility of a taxpayer-funded organization to give you the record, the answer of record. And so I think by definition, we will not be as fast as those people are because they don't have the same level of responsibility that we do. It is frustrating and it doesn't work well sometimes in the current media marketplace, but that doesn't relieve us of our responsibility to make sure that the information that we're giving you is as accurate and truthful as possible to the best of our ability. And sometimes, you know, the federal government is a big place, and it takes a while to sometimes get these answers, but attached to it is that responsibility to make sure that it's as accurate as we can give it to you.
Okay, I want to recognize. Well, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I just wanted to say that the problem that I think is that when things like this happen very quickly, there is, as we said, a moving narrative, and a sentence is being added to that narrative every 5 or 10 minutes. And CNN, 24-hour cable channels, Twitter and Facebook are feeding that narrative. And if you're not part of it, you lose control of it. So it's almost as if the truth of the matter will be decided at a later date. But right now, this is the narrative that Anderson is pushing, that Shep is pushing, that Facebook is pushing, and Twitter is pushing. And if you're not in it, I don't want to use a win or lose scenario, but if you're not involved in the conversation, you're not in, it goes beyond you.
Okay, I'd like to recognize, go ahead, sir.
Thanks. I'm Joe Davis, SCJ. Right now, this is digital but not social. Right now, if there's an earthquake, the USGS robots tweet me in 5 seconds. That's all I know. There used to be a thing called the National Response Center. Well, there still is. It used to have a great website, and you could track ongoing spill activity in almost real time. And what happened was, apparently, Defense Department web security standards caused it to be turned into something else, which is no longer very useful for journalists or anyone who wants to keep track of an ongoing story. There may be time, this was a great thing. You guys should have been proud of it. You were. But if only we could have some of that back, it would be so great. There might be a story where, you know, a tropical storm blows through the Gulf and we want to know how many rigs reported some kind of spill. Well, that would be very helpful for news reporting. So I'm pretty sure the Pentagon bureaucracy won't let you do anything good.
So, yeah.
So the NRC, even though it's housed at the Coast Guard, it's funded by several agencies who have responsibilities. And so we're going to we can have Captain Joe Loring, if you want to stand up and say hi to folks, the new head of MER. I've got 2 messages from this to take back to the community of people we talk to all the time. We have USGS in the room, we have DOT in the room, we have other agencies in the room, but the message we need to take back is twofold. First of all, go back to the NRC and figure out how we can get the agencies to chip in all and invest, because resource constraints are holding it back to, and even though we're on a .mil, there are, or a .gov or whatever, there are security ways you can interface, right? The second thing, though, I think is your point from the gentleman from the you're from Voice of America, is we have to find a way for the federal agencies to get a presence so that they can be more timely in intervening when there's misinformation, so you're not wasting your time. And so if we're on the ground and we have the lead, whether it's a pipeline agency has the lead, they got to know how to reach out to the FAA quickly, because the FAA, the DOT runs a command center, emergency response center, so we all kind of know each other. I think the responsibility to take the message back from all of you to say, hey folks, we got to up the game here, find a way to find the resources, and find a way to be monitoring that. And Howard said it and Debbie said it. We're not there yet in the federal agencies, but the media has evolved to that, and we better catch up, because I think there can be better spent if we can get a better sense of getting out there and getting the information, whether it's the NRC for oil and hazmat, or it's the whole of government for other instances that happen, aviation mishaps and things like that. So, yeah, good point.
Perhaps on the social media, one solution you may want to look at.
I don't think we can.
Oh, okay. Okay. In terms of social media, one way you can take advantage here is as soon as you declare, a spill of national significance, you come up with a hashtag, not a bureaucratic hashtag. I mean, because one is going to come up anyways.
Right.
But when, in the way Twitter works, if you're using TweetDeck or Hootsuite or whatever, you can then just put your whole column on BP oil spill. You know, hashtag BP oil spill. That way, your people can see what's happening, see what false narratives are going out there, see what narratives are going out there. I'm going to watch that because you can't, you know, my Twitter feed goes way too fast to catch all of them, but you know, you set that up. And if you're not going to do a hashtag, someone's going to do it. But if
It already exists, yes.
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, but if you start doing that and it starts to get adopted, that there's that hashtag, it makes everyone's jobs easier and perhaps even get to the truth more.
Yeah, I think, Seth, you raise an interesting point. I think we learned a really interesting lesson a couple of years ago when one of our well-meaning meteorologists in a weather forecast office in a tweet chat, in an NWS chat, referred to 2 snowstorms that were coming together as a Frankenstorm. It was an interview with me. It was an interview with you. Seriously? Oh, geez, I thought it was I'm not using his story because
I'm sorry, it wasn't a chat, and then I called him specifically
about it. So it became a hashtag Frankenstorm, and we in the Weather Service, at part of NOAA, right? Well, because it's very serious, you know, and this storm was going to impact millions of people and potentially, you know, threaten lives, and we didn't want people to take it not seriously. But your point is very well taken. That somebody who was very well-meaning, and I think was trying to explain it. This is to Debbie's point, in a way that people could understand. Right, but then it became a hashtag, and you know, I mean, it's a little bit of a fluffy example, but I think your point's very well taken, that if we at the front end don't own that, the story becomes something different than what we want it to be.
By the way, we have a hashtag today, which the people were talking about beforehand, and it's hashtag disaster talk. So if you're tweeting about today, that's what it's on. So Meg, go ahead.
Hi. So I think it's been pretty well covered that as the government, I'm Meg, I'm from NOAA, we should be faster and we should sort of get ahead of the curve on mass communications, get ahead of it with social media. But we're also not very fast. So when we're
grab somebody by the throat and saying, I want to know this or I want to know that, sometimes there are not answers that are always there. So the point is that both sides, or any of the sides, have to be realistic. Don't think that because those things are there that you're not giving the public the proper answer. A lot of times, don't give them the hype. Thank you.
Anyone want to keep it?
I am perfectly fine with giving the answer that we don't know, because that's better than not saying anything at all, and it's honest. And I appreciate people give me an honest answer. If it's like, I don't know the answer right now, or let me try to find the answer and get back to you later, like those are a fine response. The wrong response is to not respond or pretend like you know something when you don't, or to give false assurances that you know something when in fact you don't. That's what makes reporters distrustful. If the honest answer is I don't know, that's fine. We understand that.
Catherine?
Hi, I'm Catherine Foxall. I'm a freelance reporter and
Can you hear?
Here, closer? Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm Catherine Foxall, and I'm a freelance reporter, and I'm on the Society of Professional Journalists Freedom of Information Committee. Last summer, SEJ and SPJ wrote a letter to the president. We got 38 organizations signing it and got pretty much media coverage. We were asking, among other things, that agencies not do this thing of mandating that reporters go through PIOs for any kind of information. We know this is scary. We also know that this goes against written Obama administration policy. But we also know that it has the same kind of impact that censorship does everywhere, despite everybody's good intentions. The CDC last year found out that it had a culture of mishandling pathogens, the very thing that CDC is most likely to be done. But I'll tell you what the disaster there is. Closer. I'll tell you what the disaster is there with that CDC thing. All those people around that situation for all those years that culture was being built up were forbidden to ever say a word to a reporter without management's PIOs. Turns out to be guards on them. So, I mean, the ability for people to talk, and sometimes to talk to reporters, is a safety valve in an open society. When you lock up that safety valve, it's a horrendous situation. It always hides things, because there are things that you don't know that those people would communicate through the press, that they're not going to communicate through their managers. We're saying it's an extraordinary, serious situation, and we're going to continue to fight.
Okay, so we've got two kind of PIO people here. We've got Karen and we've got Howard.
I'll go first.
Sure.
About the specific sort of whistleblower aspect of that, I won't really comment on that, because there are protections for people who know of government wrongdoing and of government sort of malfeasance, and there are channels for them to do that. But sort of, this touches on a theme that I've kind of noticed throughout our discussion here. Some desire on the part of some journalists to say, you can really talk to the real journalists, and these crap journalists that are somewhere else, you can forget about them, or kind of build a relationship with you beforehand, really invest in you, or to build these channels. What the government has to do as far as planning for a disaster is kind of take the middle, kind of take the all hazards approach here, because we have to respect everybody's questions equally. Every news outlet has the right to ask the questions to the government, has the same expectation of information from the government, and so we can't take one request more seriously or less seriously than anybody else's request. And so we have to have a mechanism that takes those in, that evaluates those requests, and provides that information in as accurate a way as possible. Does that always result in immediate information to reputable news sources? I think you know the answer to that. But it is the management mechanism to handle thousands or tens of thousands of media inquiries into these types of responses. And so there has to be, this is a kind of a mass information process, and it's not fine-tuned to say, do I have a built relationship with somebody? Because even if I built a relationship with you, I might not be the guy that responds. I might be somewhere else, and a predecessor may not have that relationship with you, or you may be out and your predecessor doesn't have those types of things. So we're building a government mechanism here that is by definition broad and blunt. And so some of the specific nuances that you're asking for, we try to do through professionalism, we try to do through credos such as I mentioned before, where if we have people that can talk about it, if they own it, they can talk about it. But the big mechanisms that we try to put in place are to really provide an equity of information to all the people that are asking for us. And they're coming, like you said before, everybody's a journalist these days. If you have access to a blog or Twitter or something, you can report on something just as well as anybody else, and you have the same amount of right to ask that question.
I would just quickly add that at NOAA we have an extremely robust scientific integrity policy, and if you want to talk to any of our scientists, you can go directly to he or she, and they can talk to you. The reason we have public information officers and public affairs officers is a lot of times you may not know who to talk to, so you can use us as a resource to do that. And a lot of times it's if we're participating in a call or serving as a conduit, it might be to follow up with you on information to clarify something that a scientist said, to put you in touch with somebody else. Like I said, we're an agency of 12,000 people. We have a lot of people who work together on things, so things that, we use satellites to track oil spill and response, so maybe you want to go that angle. If you're really familiar with Dave or Debbie, you come to us to figure out who that person is. But we've been praised by people in your community for how accessible we make our scientists to you. So not to toot our own horn, I just want you to know that it's not across the board within the federal government.
It isn't. NOAA does a wonderful job.
Thank you.
But the trouble is, NOAA is an exception. I mean, if I need to talk to someone like Deke Arndt or whomever, I would call them directly, and they say they have no problem talking to me. If I want to call someone in the EPA, they're not allowed to talk to me until they go through public affairs, and then public affairs won't answer for 2 or 3 days. This is the way it is, and that's directly against Obama administration policy. It's a written policy. I send this to the scientists, I send this to public affairs, but you know what? Yeah, this administration talks about being the most transparent, and with the exception of NOAA and maybe NASA, it's not. It's legal. And USGS, I'm sorry, and USGS. 3 of the science agencies, strangely enough. It's not. This administration is far less transparent than the Bush administration, which was far less transparent than the Clinton administration. EPA is a hellhole in trying to get scientists. I've been doing this for 25 years. Mark has been doing it longer. Joe's been doing it longer. We know who we can talk to, and if we don't, we're smart enough to find the right names on our own and call them directly. But what we don't want to do is to have some flunky, and I'm sorry, some flunky say, no, you cannot talk to them. If you're not going to answer our questions, don't get in my way. And that's my problem. You're not even answering my questions, and then you're getting in my way. Don't.
Okay, so I'm cognizant of the time, and we have now, it's 5 minutes, we've gone for an hour on this topic, and obviously there's still lots more to talk about, which is great. But I want to be cognizant of the fact we have one more panel, which is thinking about the path forward. And so I think what we'll do is, don't get up out of your seats. We'll just switch off the panels, okay? And thank this panel, and we'll bring up the next panel. Okay, so we need to bring on Kathy one more chair. Just this thing on camera. I think we're just going to have to deal with those here. Just line up any place you want. Yeah, there's just one extra person on this panel. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Yeah, that should be fine. Okay. So this panel was designed to be thinking about, we were pretty sure we weren't going to get everybody waving the same flag here, and we got what we thought. So what we're going to try and do in this next panel, and there should be one for Dana, there is a chair. Let's all scoot down, because we should have 8 of us. Okay, yes, and we can share it. Can the camera pick everybody up here? Yeah, okay. All right, Howard, are you, because Dave could move closer to me, he obviously doesn't want to.